I want you to take a second and see if you can identify a very specific physical sensation. It's, well, it's this sudden, almost invisible tightness that kind of gathers right beneath your sternum.
Oh, yeah, like a tiny knot.
Right.
Hmm.
You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that tiny physical flinch you do right before opening an email that you already suspect is going to be bad news.
Yep.
Or maybe it's the way your jaw just involuntarily clenches when a project you've been building collapses for, the third time this month.
Oh, that is the
It
worst.
really is. And sometimes it's just this low background hum of dread that shows up on a random Tuesday, not because anything has actually gone wrong yet, but because some older, much faster part of your nervous system has already run the probabilities and, well, decided it just doesn't like them.
Yeah, we all carry that tightness,
Mhm.
and we carry it for years without really um, stopping to examine what it actually is mechanically.
Right, because we just assume it's normal.
Exactly. Culturally, we tend to give it all sorts of noble-sounding names. We call it, vigilance, or we call it being a realist or staying sharp.
I definitely tell myself I'm just being realistic.
We all do. Often we just write it off as the inevitable tax of being a responsible adult living in a very uncertain, fast-moving world.
We really do wear it like a badge of honor, as if to say, look at how stressed I am. That proves I'm paying attention to my life.
But if we put that exact same physical sensation under a clinical light, I mean, the reality is a lot less glamorous.
How so?
Well, what you are actually experiencing in that moment of tightness is just a biological system attempting to exert control over a variable that it does not, in any meaningful sense, have access to.
And honestly, that realization is the entire mission of today's deep dive. We are looking at an incredibly diverse stack of sources today.
It's a really broad stack.
It is. We've got clinical studies on stress physiology and allostatic load, historical data on 1960s weather modeling, all the way to modern philosophical essays on compatibilism and decision theory.
Which sounds heavy, but it all connects beautifully.
It really does.
Hmm.
The goal is to use this stack to fundamentally redefine the concept of fate. And I want to be clear right up front, we are not talking about fate as some kind of, mysticism.
Right, no crystal balls here.
Exactly. We aren't talking about resignation or using destiny as an excuse to just throw your hands up and sit on the couch forever.
Far from it. The sources are actually pointing us toward fate as a measurable physical, psychological, and ethical reality.
Yeah.
We're looking at what it actually means, mechanically, to live in a world governed by unimaginably complex chains of cause and effect.
And more importantly, we're going to explore what actually changes in your life and in your physical body when you stop spending your finite energy fighting that massive chain of universal causes and start focusing entirely on the narrow, real portion of it that you can actually direct. But, before we can talk about making peace with the universe, we kind of need to look at our own hardware.
We do. We have to understand why our bodies are constantly bracing for impact in the first place.
Right.
So to understand the hardware, we have to look at the biology of worry, specifically through the lens of acute stress physiology.
Okay.
When you observe acute stress responses across different species, the mechanism is incredibly efficient, but it is fundamentally designed to be self-limiting.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Are we talking about the classic zebra running from a lion scenario?
That's the textbook example, yeah. So if you look at a zebra grazing on the savanna and a lion attacks, the zebra sprints for its life.
Right, obviously.
And in that split second, the zebra experiences a massive functional physiological shift. Cortisol and adrenaline just flood the system. Glucose is mobilized instantly for muscle energy.
Wow.
And blood flow is completely redirected away from the skin and internal organs straight to the large muscles. Any non-essential systems like digestion or cellular repair are just entirely shut down.
Because, if you're about to be lunged, digesting your breakfast is really no longer a priority.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly metabolically expensive state for a body to sustain. It burns massive amounts of energy, but it does real tangible work. It saves the zebra's life.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, the critical part of this equation is what happens next. Within minutes of outrunning that lion and reaching safety, the zebra's entire alarm system stands still.
It just turns off.
Completely. The physical threat is gone, and the physiological response ends. The zebra does not spend the next 3 weeks grazing while internally replaying the chase.
Right.
It doesn't rehearse what it should have done differently, and it certainly doesn't lie awake at night bracing for a lion that already failed to catch it. It goes back to baseline.
Which really highlights a massive structural flaw in human beings.
It does.
Because our nervous systems are running on that exact same primitive machinery.
Hmm.
Like, we evolved the same acute stress response for the exact same life or death purposes. But then evolution layered this highly unusual, incredibly powerful capability right on top of it, which is the ability to simulate the future.
The human predictive engine, it's what built modern civilization.
Right. It's an amazing cognitive tool. We can imagine scenarios that haven't happened yet to plan for them. But the flaw is that we can trigger the identical physiological alarm response purely through mental representation.
Yeah, no actual lion required.
Exactly. You can trigger a massive cortisol spike just by imagining a difficult conversation you have to have with your boss next week. You can shut down your digestive system by replaying an argument you had 3 years ago in the shower.
Yeah.
It's like we have the ability to pull the building's fire alarm just by imagining a match.
That is a perfect visualization. And the biological consequences of pulling that imaginary fire alarm are severe.
I can imagine.
Because the threat you are modeling is conceptual rather than physical, there is never a clear moment of reaching safety. There is no objective signal for the system to stand down.
Oh, wow. So it just keeps running.
Right. So the alarm doesn't ring for 3 minutes. It runs for months.
And this isn't just some poetic metaphor about feeling tired, right?
Yeah.
This is measurable damage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Physiologists call it allostatic load. It is the physical wear and tear your body accumulates from keeping a stress response system switched on long after or long before any actual physical threat requires it.
Jeez.
It degrades your cardiovascular system. It suppresses your immune system. It just wreaks havoc on your metabolic health.
Right.
The hardware was never meant to run the software of infinite abstract future casting.
You know, the research makes a really empathetic point here that I love. This isn't a character flaw.
No, not at all.
You aren't lying awake at 3 a.m. worrying about your mortgage because you're weak or neurotic. It's an unavoidable side effect of having a genuinely useful cognitive capacity planning and mistakenly applying it to situations it just cannot resolve.
Yeah, and the irony of that predictive engine is what really shifts this conversation from biology into physics.
Yeah, this is the part that really gets me. Our bodies are basically running a faulty software program, reacting to imagined threats as if they were physical lions. We spend all this metabolic energy simulating the future. So why are our predictions usually completely wrong?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. I mean, if we are sacrificing our health to forecast our lives, we should at least be good at it.
But we are terribly bad at it. And the reason we are bad at it lies in the physics of how highly complex systems behave over time. We need to talk about deterministic unpredictability.
Okay, so when you say a system is governed entirely by deterministic physical laws, meaning no magic, no randomness, just pure cause and effect, most people would assume that means it's perfectly predictable.
Sure.
Like, if you know the rules of the game, you can predict the score.
And that was the assumption in classical physics for a really long time. The clearest demonstration of why that assumption shatters comes from weather modeling back in the 1960s.
Okay, tell me about that.
So a researcher named Edward Lorenz was using early computers to simulate global weather patterns. The system was governed entirely by known physics, temperature, pressure, fluid dynamics.
Right, hard math.
Exactly. One day, he decided to rerun a simulation. But to save a little bit of time, he rounded off one single variable by a few decimal places. We are talking about an unimaginably tiny difference, like less than 1 part in 1,000.
Something that seems completely mathematically insignificant.
Completely. By all conventional logic, it should have been insignificant. But what he found was that this vanishingly small difference early on compounded through millions of repeated interactions.
Wow.
It didn't just tweak the forecast slightly, it produced a wildly, completely different long-range weather pattern.
Just from rounding a number.
Just from that. And this wasn't an error in the computer code. It revealed a fundamental property of systems with many interacting variables. They possess a sensitive dependence on initial conditions.
Oh, this is what entered pop culture as the butterfly effect, right? The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can alter the path of a tornado in Texas weeks later.
Yes, exactly. But the deep insight for us here is that a system can be entirely deterministic governed start to finish by real physical laws with absolutely no randomness,
Yeah.
and yet still be practically unpredictable to any observer.
That's why.
And no matter how much computing power or how much anxious 3 a.m. attention you bring to it, you just cannot calculate the compounding interactions.
Wait, hold on. I'm struggling with this implication a little bit. Because a human life is exactly this kind of complex system times a million.
It is.
Are you saying my life is just like the weather?
I mean, think about all the variables that compound to create your exact current reality.
Right. It's my genetics, the specific developmental environment I grew up in, the random teachers who happen to be present at formative moments.
Yep.
The exact state of the global economy the very year I graduated and entered the job market. Even just a single chance meeting at a coffee shop that redirected the next decade of my career.
Right. And all of those factors compound in the exact same way Lorenz's weather variables did. They interact, they amplify, and they redirect one another continuously.
So my life is entirely explicable in retrospect. Like, when I look backward, I can trace the chain of causes perfectly. Oh, I met this person, which led to this job, which led to moving to this city. It all makes sense backwards,
Yeah.
but it is completely unforecastable in advance.
Exactly. Both of those things are true simultaneously. It is lawful and it is unpredictable. The deep discomfort of holding that contradiction is usually what that tightness under your sternum is actually responding to.
Because my brain hates not knowing.
Yes. Your brain wants to predict a system that mathematically refuses to be predicted.
You know, one of the sources uses this brilliant analogy of a river carving a canyon to explain this.
I love that one.
Yeah. When you watch water cutting through rock over 10,000 years, you don't look at the water and think, wow, that water is incredibly willful and ambitious. Or conversely, that water is so fatalistic, just giving up and going with the flow.
Neither applies. The water is just outputting the results of real forces. It arrives at a point on the landscape and moves toward the steepest path of descent available.
Right.
And that path was shaped by the accumulated geology of the terrain, the rock hardness, the sediment, tectonic forces that were laid down millions of years before that specific water ever arrived.
The water is just acting in precise accordance with the total structure of the forces acting on it. It's not a blank canvas, but it's also not some mystical destiny.
Right.
It's just the lawful output of an enormous number of real causes. But if I'm being honest, that brings up a really heavy existential crisis.
Oh, so?
Well, if I'm just water in a river, if everything in my life is the compounded product of past causes, genetics, and economic geology I didn't create, then it really feels like I'm just a passenger.
Oh,
Should I just stop trying? I mean, are the sources actually saying my choices don't matter? Where is my agency?
Yeah, this is one of the oldest, most intense debates in the philosophy of action. If determinism is true, do we have free will? Modern philosophy offers a very careful, livable framework to answer this, generally called compatibilism. It's designed to resolve the apparent contradiction without forcing you to pick between total illusion or total control.
I'm not going to lie, compatibilism sounds like a philosophical loophole. How does it actually work in practice?
It works by pointing out that we've been asking the wrong question entirely. The standard for agency isn't whether your action was somehow uncaused. I mean, nothing in the universe is uncaused.
Right.
Your brain, your preferences, your trauma, they all have prior causes. The real question for your agency is whether an action flowed from your specific reasoning, your internal values, rather than from external coercion.
Okay, can we put that in a real-world scenario?
Sure. Let's say you choose to accept a new job because it aligns with your passion for design. Now, a strict determinist would say you only like design because of the way your brain developed, the art classes you were exposed to as a child, and the cultural premium on creative work.
Basically saying, I didn't invent those causes, so my choice isn't truly free?
Right. The geology of the riverbed made you do it.
Yeah.
But a compatibilist looks at that same scenario and says, yes, your history shaped your values, but you are still the mechanism doing the evaluating in this moment. Compare that to someone holding a gun to your head and forcing you to take a job you hate. In both scenarios, the universe is governed by cause and effect. But there is a massive, meaningful difference between an action that flows authentically through your internal reasoning and an action forced upon you by external manipulation.
Oh, okay. So even if my brain and my values were shaped by history, if I am the one doing the reasoning and making the choice in this moment, it is authentically mine. I'm the causal bottleneck.
Exactly. What matters is not whether the ultimate outcome was somehow fixed in advance by the physics of the universe.
Yeah.
What matters is whether you showed up to do the deciding.
That is actually incredibly empowering. because it means the alternative to fatalism isn't having total control over the universe. Nobody has ever had total control over the universe.
Right.
The real alternative to fatalism is simply showing up fully as the specific causal factor that you are in the chain. Agency is just doing the work on the tiny, entirely real piece of reality that actually runs through you.
But, that leads us directly into a very tricky mathematical problem. Yeah. If our only true agency is being a good, authentic link in this massive causal chain, how do we evaluate if we are actually doing a good job?
Right, because usually the way we measure our choices is by looking at the outcome. Like if I started a business and it made $1 million, I made a brilliant choice. If the business went bankrupt, I made a terrible choice.
Exactly. And treating outcomes as a perfect mirror of your decision-making is a profound cognitive error. In modern decision theory, there's a very specific term for this. Resulting.
Resulting.
Yeah. Resulting is when you judge the quality of a decision entirely by how the outcome turned out, rather than by the quality of the reasoning and the information you actually had available at the time you made the choice.
Oh, this goes right back to the butterfly effect.
Yes. Because outcomes in complex systems always carry a massive component of what statisticians call irreducible variance.
Irreducible variance.
Think of it like a perfectly fair coin landing on the wrong side. You can make a brilliantly reasoned, highly skilled decision built on the absolute best available evidence. You execute it perfectly. And it can still fail simply because of irreducible variance.
And on the flip side, a totally careless, foolish decision can succeed purely by blind luck.
Exactly.
It's like if I decide to drive down the highway completely blindfolded, and somehow by sheer miracle I don't crash, I make it home alive.
Right.
That does not mean driving blindfolded was a good decision. If I look at that outcome and immediately start selling a masterclass on vision-free commuting, I am taking credit for blind luck. I've completely lost the ability to learn.
It sounds absurd when you frame it with a blindfold, but we do this constantly in business, in relationships, in health. We take credit for the good luck.
We really do.
But the reverse is usually much more painful. We take excessive, crushing blame for bad luck as though it were poor judgment. Existentialist philosophy points out the deep ethical dimension of this error.
Which is?
If the outcome of a situation was never fully within your control, evaluating yourself strictly by that outcome isn't just mathematically wrong. It was deeply, strictly unfair to yourself.
To me, a rigged game.
Completely.
If you quietly let outcomes dictate your self-worth, it produces a very specific, corrosive kind of unhappiness. You become someone who did everything right, but treats a bad result as proof that you are fundamentally inadequate.
Yeah.
You are essentially punishing yourself for not being able to control the weather.
Right. The more coherent, livable standard is authentic action. You hold yourself fully accountable for the part that was actually yours, the decision process, your integrity, your effort, and you treat the remainder honestly as what it is, variance. Not with indifference, but with accuracy.
Logically, I get this. It makes total sense. I am responsible for my actions, not the cosmic math of the outcome. But here is the big hurdle.
Okay.
How do we get the body to actually agree? Because my mind can understand irreducible variance. But when a project fails, that tightness under my sternum still flares up. My jaw is still clenched.
This brings us to the most practical part of the deep dive, the physiology of letting go. We had to distinguish between two very different types of energetic states in the body. Organic energy versus what one of the sources terms rumination or the petulance plague.
It's a petulance plague. That's aggressive. What exactly makes it a plague?
It's called a plague because of how contagious and consuming it is to your own internal resources. Let's start with its opposite, though. Organic energy.
Okay.
When you experience a real violation, a real loss, or a real failure, you naturally generate anger or grief. If that anger helps you identify the boundary that was crossed, if it responds proportionately and then crucially stands down once the reality has been addressed, that is organic energy. It runs on something real and it completes its cycle.
It does its job like the zebra mobilizing to run from the lion, and then it's over.
Precisely. The petulance plague, or rumination, runs on a completely different fuel. Rumination is the repetitive, backward-facing rehearsal of a distressing event.
I know that feeling too well.
We all do. It's an argument with reality.
Yeah.
It's a grievance that regenerates its own justification indefinitely. It keeps your physiological arousal activated without ever letting it resolve.
Right.
It produces continuous physical costs without ever converting into resolution or altered behavior.
And the danger there is what the source calls surety preceding growth. Like if your nervous system is stuck actively spending its metabolic resources on sustained threat monitoring, refighting a battle in your head that ended 3 weeks ago, it measurably has less capacity available for anything else.
Exactly.
You literally do not have the metabolic resources for growth, for creativity, or for connection because your body is hoarding them all for an imaginary lion.
Which brings us to the ultimate goal of all of this material, achieving thought-somatic agreement.
Mind and body actually getting on the same page, how do we do that? Because simply telling myself to relax has never worked in the history of human anxiety.
Right, because the mind and the body are caught in a feedback loop.
Hmm.
Your brain perceives a conceptual threat, so it sends a signal to your body to brace. Your body clenches, your jaw tightens, your breathing gets shallow.
Hmm.
But then your brain reads that physical clenching as confirmation.
Hmm.
It says, look, my body is braced, there must be a real lion here.
Oh, man.
To break the loop, the reasoning mind's conclusion, I have done what was mine to do, the rest is variance,
Yeah.
has to be paired with physical intervention.
So it's not just a thought, it's an action.
It requires an active physical signal to the vagus nerve. That
Mm.
might mean consciously dropping your shoulders. It might mean taking a long, extended exhale, which biologically forces the heart rate to slow.
Okay, so a physical reset.
Yes, it's the moment you notice the tightness under the sternum. You physically release the posture of defense, and you pair it with the cognitive realization. My part of the chain is complete. Until that agreement is physiological, no amount of accurate reasoning is fully going to land. The body has to physically agree that the math is done.
It's really about giving your nervous system the explicit permission to stand down.
Once that agreement happens, real metabolic capacity frees up. You get your energy back for whatever comes next, instead of being indefinitely committed to refighting a variable you were never going to win.
Let's bring this all together for just a regular Tuesday. What does making peace with fate actually look like when you're just trying to get through the week? It turns out it's not some dramatic moment of surrender on a mountaintop, and it's not a triumphant victory over the universe either.
No, it's much quieter than that.
It looks like noticing that familiar tightness beneath your sternum before you automatically defer to it. It looks like doing the specific, skillful, fully reasoned work that is actually sitting in front of you.
Right.
And then it looks like accurately treating the result of that work as only partially a referendum on you.
It's letting a real, proportionate reaction complete itself instead of relitigating it for the fourth week running.
Let's go back to that image of the river. The river is still out there, finding its path through the terrain. And the geology of that land isn't going to change just because you demand it to. The complex chain of causes in the world will keep operating exactly as it always has.
But the profound realization is that you do not have to stand at the river's edge with clenched fists arguing with a current that settled its course long before you ever arrived.
The hand can open, not because the terrain suddenly became negotiable or because you gave up, but because you realize your only real jurisdiction was never the terrain to begin with. Your only real power has always been the quality of your attention, your decisions, and your actions in the narrow, entirely governable present moment.
Consider the single most frustrating outcome in your life right now. The one thing you are currently exhausting yourself trying to control. You've been trying to force the river. But what if tonight you tracked backward and listed the millions of tiny variables that created this situation long before you ever showed up? The economy, the genetics, the chance encounters. What happens to your anger when you realize the universe wasn't plotting against you? It was just doing math. And what if the most powerful thing you can do right now isn't fighting it, but giving your body permission to agree with what your mind already knows? That your part of the chain is already complete.
See you next time on The Deep Dive.